In 1955, in Pasadena, California, a 31-year-old lawyer drove a beat-up yellow Pontiac with a botched paint job. He was newly divorced. He had lost the house in the settlement. He had 2 surviving children at home, and he was paying out of pocket every week for the chemotherapy of his 9-year-old son, Teddy, who had leukemia. There was no health insurance for it. There were no effective treatments either. Teddy would not survive. Charlie's friend Rick Guerin remembered seeing him at the hospital. Charlie would hold his son. He would visit almost every day. Then he would walk the streets of Pasadena afterwards, alone. He cried as he walked. His daughter once asked him why he kept driving such a terrible car. Why didn't he get something better? He told her, to discourage gold diggers. He kept his sense of humor. Even then. The man in that car was Charlie Munger. 23 years later, he would be vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, sitting beside Warren Buffett at the most extraordinary capital allocation operation in financial history. 40 years later, his thinking would be required reading for anyone serious about markets. He would die on the 28th of November, 2023, at age 99, 34 days short of his 100th birthday, and Warren Buffett would call him the architect of modern Berkshire. This is his story, and more importantly, this is the way of thinking he built. The way of thinking that compounds for life if you build it carefully enough. I am your host, and this is The Greatest Traders. Episode 11. Charlie Munger. Charles Thomas. Munger was born on the 1st of January 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska, the same town that would later produce Warren Buffett. As a teenager, Charlie stocked grocery shelves at Buffett & Son. The store was owned by Warren's grandfather, Ernest. Warren worked there too. They never met. The boy who would become his life partner was 8 years younger, and in those years, that gap was a continent. Charlie's path bent through 3 different lives before it landed on investing. He enrolled at the University of Michigan in 1941 to study mathematics. Pearl Harbor pulled him out within a year. A few days after his 19th birthday, in early 1943, he dropped out and enlisted in the Army Air Corps. The military gave him a general classification test. He scored extremely high. So they decided his real talent was meteorology, of all things, and they shipped him to Caltech in Pasadena to study weather forecasting. He came out the other side of the war with a wife, a young child, and no undergraduate degree. Harvard Law School rejected him on those grounds. No bachelor's. They would not even consider his application. Then a former dean of Harvard Law, a family friend named Roscoe Pound, made a phone call. Charlie was admitted. He graduated 3 years later, magna cum laude, in 1948. One of the most distinguished graduates of his class. For the next 17 years, he practiced law in California. Eventually, in 1962, he co-founded the firm that still bears his name today. Munger, Toles, and Olson. He was good at the law. He found it deeply unsatisfying. His clients were building businesses. They were making fortunes. He was earning an hourly fee. The asymmetry was not lost on him. Then came the years that would have broken most people. In 1953, at age 29, Charlie's 8-year marriage ended in divorce. Divorce carried a heavy social stigma in 1950s California. His wife kept the house in South Pasadena. Charlie's friends described his new bachelor accommodation as dreadful. He moved in. He worked long hours. He started over. A year later, his 8-year-old son Teddy was diagnosed with leukemia. The disease was effectively untreatable in the 1950s. There was no health insurance to cover what little treatment existed. Charlie paid for everything himself, out of pocket. He visited Teddy at the hospital almost every day for the year of his illness, then walked the streets of Pasadena afterwards, crying. Teddy died in 1955. Charlie was 31 years old. 25 years after that, in 1980, a botched cataract surgery left Charlie in agonizing pain. The eye had to be removed. He was 56, and partially blind in the other one too. When asked how he would manage, given that he was an obsessive reader, his response was characteristic. "It's time for me to learn Braille." That was Charlie Munger. None of this is filler. It is the foundation under everything else he believed. His philosophy was not assembled in comfort. It was assembled by a man who had buried a child and chosen, deliberately, not to be destroyed by it. Years later, asked how he kept standing through all of it, he gave one of his most famous answers. Envy, resentment, revenge, and self-pity are disastrous modes of thought. Self-pity gets close to paranoia. Every mischance in life is an opportunity to behave well and to learn. It's not to be immersed in self-pity, but to utilize the blow constructively. Most articles about Charlie Munger skip this section. It's uncomfortable. Listicles about his 10 mental models don't sit well next to a child dying in a hospital bed. But this is exactly why his lessons land harder than the average Twitter thread on investing. He earned them. While Charlie was practicing law, he started investing on the side. Property deals, real estate development with his friend Otis Booth. And in 1962, he co-founded a small investment partnership called Wheeler, Munger and Company, taking a seat on the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange. From 1962 to 1975. 13 years. The Wheeler-Munger partnership returned an annualized 19.8%, against the Dow's 5% over the same period. Buffett would later cite that record in his famous 1984 essay, The Super Investors of Graham and Doddsville. Charlie's track record was one of his proofs that consistent market-beating returns were possible. By 1965, Charlie had stopped practicing law entirely. He committed full-time to investing. But the partnership that would change finance forever wasn't Wheeler-Munger. It was the dinner that happened in 1959 in Omaha, where Charlie finally met Warren Buffett. The two of them were introduced over dinner by mutual friends. The conversation lasted hours. Buffett later said it was the closest he had ever come to making a friend instantly. By 1978, Charlie was vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. The two of them ran one of the most extraordinary capital allocation operations in financial history together for the next 45 years, until Charlie's death. To understand what Charlie actually contributed, you have to understand what Buffett was doing before Charlie arrived. Buffett was a disciple of Benjamin Graham. The Graham approach was clinical. Find companies trading well below their liquidation value. Buy them. Wait for the price to converge. Sell. Repeat. Graham called these companies cigar butts, businesses with one good puff of value left in them, available for free. The strategy worked. It also had a ceiling. Cigar butt investing requires constant turnover. The companies you buy are usually mediocre. You make money on the gap between price and asset value, not on the underlying business. Once Berkshire grew past a certain size, there were not enough cigar butts in the entire market to absorb the capital. Charlie pushed Buffett toward something completely different. Stop buying mediocre companies cheap. Start buying excellent companies at fair prices. The 1972 acquisition of See's Candies for $25 million is usually marked as the turning point. See's was not statistically cheap by Graham's standards, but it had a brand customers loved, pricing power that survived inflation, tiny capital requirements relative to the cash it threw off, year after year. Buffett, on Charlie's prodding, bought it. Over the next 50 years, See's Candies returned over $2 billion in cash to Berkshire on that initial $25 million outlay. Buffett would later describe Charlie's contribution in plain terms. Charlie shoved me in the direction of not just buying bargains, as Ben Graham had taught me. This was the real impact he had on me. It took a powerful force to move me on from Graham's limiting view. It was the power of Charlie's mind. That single shift, from quantitative bargain hunting to qualitative excellence at a fair price, is responsible for almost everything Berkshire became after 1972. Most articles describe Buffett and Munger as partners and leave it there. The interesting question is why the partnership worked. Buffett was the optimist. He looked at a business and saw what could go right. Durable competitive advantages, pricing power, what the next 20 years could compound into. Charlie was the inversion-driven realist. He looked at the same business and asked what could go wrong. How does this company die? What destroys this thesis? What does the seller know that we don't? Their meetings reportedly involved long pauses. Buffett would propose. Charlie would say no more often than yes. Charlie's most common contribution to a deal was killing it. Buffett described the function in his usual plain way. Charlie doesn't think anything is a great idea, so if I get him up to grunt, that's a positive. The genius of the pairing was complementarity, not similarity. Buffett's optimism without Charlie's veto would have led to too many deals at too high prices. Charlie's caution without Buffett's conviction would have led to too few deals at any price. Together, they produced what neither could alone, a high-conviction process that almost never lost money on a major position. For traders, the lesson is direct. Pair your optimism with a structured pessimist. If your trading partner is yourself, then the structured pessimist has to be a checklist, a journal, a pre-commitment to inversion. The trader who only sees what could go right will overtrade. The trader who only sees what could go wrong will never enter. The trader who systematically does both in that order has a process that survives. If you only ever take one thing from Charlie Munger, take this. He called it the latticework of mental models. The idea is simple to state and very hard to live. You cannot understand markets through finance alone. Finance is a tool. Like any tool, it has a domain where it works and domains where it does not. Charlie's signature warning on this point was characteristically blunt. If you don't get this elementary, but mildly unnatural, mathematics of elementary probability into your repertoire, then you go through a long life like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. Real markets are made of people. People are not financial instruments. They are biological organisms running on evolutionary heuristics in social structures shaped by history, governed by physics, constrained by mathematics, and animated by psychology. Charlie's solution was to build a working knowledge of the big ideas from many disciplines. Then, array your experience across that grid. He estimated that maybe 80 or 90 models, drawn from a dozen disciplines, would carry the freight of most decisions a person ever needs to make. Basic statistics, evolutionary biology, microeconomics, cognitive psychology, classical physics, accounting. The disciplines themselves are not exotic. The work is in the integration. In Charlie's own words, I paid no attention to the territorial boundaries of academic disciplines. I just grabbed all the big ideas that I could. For a trader, this is the difference between asking, "What is the chart telling me?" and asking, "What game is being played here? Who is playing it? What do they want? How does that interact with the structural forces of the market right now? And what is my edge inside that?" The first question keeps you on the surface. The second one starts to look like Munger. The most underused tool in all of trading is one of Charlie's favorites. He borrowed it from a 19th century mathematician named Carl Jacobi, who advised, invert. Always invert. Most problems become easier when you flip them. Instead of asking how to win, ask what would guarantee losing, then refuse to do those things. Charlie's most famous personal version of this: he wanted to know where he was going to die, so he could never go there. That is inversion in one sentence. For a trader, the inversion of "how do I make consistent money" produces a far more useful list than the question itself. How do I lose all my money? Trade without a stop-loss. Risk too much per trade. Move my stop after entry. Add to losers. Trade revenge. Trade tired. Trade tilted. Trade bored. Take signals from people whose track record I have never verified. Convince myself this trade is special. That list is not glamorous. It is also more actionable than any list of 10 habits of successful traders you will ever read. Charlie's instinct was to identify the destroyers first, eliminate them, and let what remains do the work. Charlie understood compounding more deeply than almost anyone. Buffett gets the public credit for compounding. To Buffett, compounding was the engine of wealth. To Charlie, it was a description of how almost everything important in life worked. Skill compounds, reputation compounds, knowledge compounds, trust compounds. Mistakes also compound, which is why avoiding the catastrophic ones matters more than capturing every small win. His operational rule was stark. The first rule of compounding: never interrupt it unnecessarily. The trader who saves 1% per trade in commission costs and applies it for 30 years is not 30% better off. The trader who avoids one account-blowing decision is not just safer. They keep the entire compounding machine running. That's why risk of ruin matters more than expected value for any trader trying to survive long enough to compound. Charlie's sit-on-your-ass investing was the operational expression of taking compounding seriously. Long holding periods, very few decisions, brutal patience. He said it himself in one of his most repeated lines. If you took our top 15 decisions out, we would have a pretty average record. It wasn't hyperactivity. It was a hell of a lot of patience. You stuck to your principles, and when opportunities came along, you pounced on them with vigor. Charlie also believed in the circle of competence, hard. Every trader has one, a set of markets, instruments, time frames, and conditions where their knowledge gives them a real edge. Outside that circle, they're guessing. Inside it, they're operating. Charlie's discipline was not so much expanding the circle. It was knowing exactly where its edges were, his line on it. It's not a competency if you don't know the edge of it. He passed on countless deals because they were outside what he understood. Even when those deals later went on to make other people rich, he was not trying to capture every opportunity. He was trying to never make a catastrophic mistake by overestimating his own understanding. For a discretionary trader, this is the question. Where exactly is my edge? Not, I'm pretty good at trading. Specifically, which instrument, which time frame, which session, which setup, which time of day. The honest answer is usually a much smaller circle than the trader thinks. Professionals know their circle to the millimeter. They trade inside it. They walk away from everything outside it. Charlie was not infallible. He named his biggest mistakes openly, often, and used them to teach. In the late 1960s, Charlie and Warren bought Hochschild Kohn, a Baltimore-based department store chain, bought at a discount to book and liquidating value, pure Graham-style cigar butt thinking. It didn't work. The business was structurally weak. Charlie's one-line summary later: it didn't work as an investment. This loss is part of what pushed him toward the See's Candies thesis 4 years later. In 1989, Berkshire bought $358 million of U.S. Airways stock. The investment struggled for years. Charlie and Warren both later acknowledged it as a mistake of stepping outside the circle of competence. And in 2021 and 2022, Daily Journal Corporation, where Charlie was chairman, bought a significant Alibaba position. After Jack Ma's October 2020 speech criticizing Chinese regulators triggered government retaliation, the stock fell sharply. At the 2023 Daily Journal annual meeting, Charlie called it directly. "I regard Alibaba as one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. In thinking about Alibaba, I got charmed by their position in the Chinese internet and didn't stop to realize they're still a goddamned retailer." But the Munger lesson from his own losses is the one he repeated most, and it's not the one most articles quote. The biggest mistakes are mistakes of omission, not mistakes of commission. The trades you didn't take, when you saw the setup clearly and hesitated, they cost more over a career than the trades you took and lost. He cited Belridge Oil personally. He was offered 300 shares. He took them. 3 days later, he was offered 1,500 more at the same price. He passed. The shares went on to multiply. He used that story for 50 years afterwards as a warning. When you've actually identified an edge, hesitation is the most expensive mistake you can make. Charlie Munger lived 99 years. He kept reading and learning until weeks before his death. His view, which he repeated often, was that the only life worth living was one dedicated, in substantial part, to good outcomes you would not personally survive to see. He was building a way of thinking, and he gave it away, in speeches, in books, to anyone who wanted it. For traders, the gift is the latticework itself. Markets are too complex for one model. The traders who survive long enough to compound are the ones who think with multiple lenses. Invert before they commit. Know their edge precisely, and have the patience to wait for setups that fit. None of that is a strategy. All of it is Munger. The strategy will change with the market. The way of thinking, if you build it well, compounds for life. I'll leave you with the line he probably would have wanted to leave with you. Spend each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up, day by day. And at the end of the day, if you live long enough, like most people, you will get out of life what you deserve. That was Charlie Munger. This was episode 11 of The Greatest Traders. I'm your host. Thank you for listening.